The appendicular skeleton consists of the upper and lower limbs plus the bones that attach them to the axial skeleton, which is your skull, spinal column, and thoracic cage, which is the ribs and sternum. The bones that hold the arms on are called the pectoral girdle, because they're in the chest. They are the clavicle, which you may have heard of before as your collarbone, and the scapula, also called the shoulder blade. The clavicle is the only S-shaped bone you're going to find. The wider end attaches to the sternum. The flatter end attaches to the scapula. This is actually the only joint that connects the arms to the axial skeleton, is from clavicle to sternum. The scapula, clavicle means key because it's the key holding on your arms. Scapula means little shovel, named for its shape. You could kind of dig with it. Most of it is flat and triangular. At the top are more complex structures. This ridge, which you can feel along the back of your shoulder, is the spine of the scapula. And where it comes out from the rest of the bone to form this projection is called the acromion process. And that is where it articulates with the clavicle. So here's anterior and posterior of your shoulders. The other bump is the coracoid process, which means like a crow. It's sort of like a bird's beak. It is C-shaped, so the one with the C name is C-shaped. Between the two is this indentation called the glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. Now, if you've heard of your shoulder as a ball and socket joint, this is the socket. So we have glen and cora together in the shoulder. Glenoid cavity, coracoid process. And then the larger process is the acromion. Acro means tip. If you need to know other parts of the scapula, there are borders, medial, lateral, and superior, and those are just the edges of the triangle, and fossae, supraspinous and infraspinous fossa on this posterior side, so above and below the spine. There are muscles named for attaching in those places. And then on the anterior, the side that faces the ribs, this is called the subscapular fossa. When we say sub in everyday speech, it means below. But in anatomy, we use infra for below, as in above and below, sub for deep, as in further from the surface. This is further from the surface because your back is here. This is between the scapula and the ribs. Your upper arm bone is the humerus. It is your funny bone, oddly, but it's not spelled the same way as ha-ha humerus. Humerus is Latin for upper arm. It has a head, which is this round part, and that is the ball of the ball and socket joint. Now, how many details you need to know on the humerus depends on how advanced your course is. I'm going to go through all of them that I can remember, but remember, if you're in my class, you only need to know head and a few things at the distal end. Okay. These bumps near the top are tubercles. Greater is the lateral one. Lesser tubercle is the anterior one. Between them is the intertubercular groove. All of this is the shaft. And then here at the distal or elbow end, on the anterior, which we can identify by lesser tubercle, there are two small fossae, coronoid and radial. And we'll talk about how those get their names. They tie in with other bones. Some bones will have condyles at the end, which are these rounded surfaces, but on the humerus they get special names. This one that's the most round is called the capitulum, or head. This one that has a groove in it like a pulley is the trochlea. Trochlea means pulley. To the sides are epicondyles, lateral and medial. Epicondyles are places that muscles attach. The medial epicondyle is what makes the humerus your funny bone. There's a nerve that hooks behind it, and if you bump your elbow, you can squeeze that nerve between the humerus and a hard surface, and that's what makes your whole forearm tingle. So anterior, we have lesser tubercle, greater tubercle, intertubercular groove, coronoid fossa, radial fossa, capitulum, trochlea, medial and lateral epicondyles. Now if we go to the posterior, we can see the capitulum doesn't go all the way around, but the trochlea does. And just above it is a larger indentation called the olecranon fossa. Olecranon means elbow. The two bones of your forearm form joints with this end of the humerus. So you can tell medial by the head, because that has to go towards your shoulder. The ulna is the medial forearm bone, and it has a U shape. So ulna has a U shape, and it's shaped kind of like a wrench. The ulna fits over the trochlea and forms the hinge joint of your elbow. Three parts up here that match up with the humerus. We have the olecranon process that fits into the olecranon fossa. Trochlear notch is this C shape that fits onto the trochlea. And then the coronoid process, again, crown-shaped, like the one on the mandible, that fits into the coronoid fossa when your elbow is bent. Okay. So bring your elbow all the way forward, coronoid process goes into coronoid fossa. Bring it all the way back, olecranon process goes into olecranon fossa. It's a little groove on the side where the radius fits against the humerus, or against the ulna. And down here, this is the head of the ulna. It's the only bone that has its head on its distal end instead of its proximal end. Attached to the head is this spike called the styloid process. You're probably familiar with a stylus. It means pen. So the styloid process resembles a pen, much like the one on the temporal bone, which is a narrower, longer point. The radius is round. Its head is concave, but it's still circular. The radial head fits against the capitulum of the humerus, and that's why it's called the capitulum, little head. And it can twist like this, and that's what allows you to turn your wrist. The movement's not actually happening at the wrist, but at the elbow. This is my radius tilting along there. The radius fits against the ulna here and down here. We call this the ulnar notch. So after the head is the neck, and then this bump is the tuberosity. So we have tuberosities, we have tubercles. Both of them are irregular bumps. Think tuber like a potato. And then the radius also has a styloid process at the distal end. You can feel the styloid process of the radius here on your wrist, directly below the thumb. The styloid process of the ulna is on the back, below the pinky. The last thing for the upper limb is the bones of the hand. The radius and ulna connect here. The thumb is the radial side. Pinky is the ulnar side. This group of short bones is the carpals. Carpal is wrist. There are 8 of them. They each have a name. There are a couple of different memory aids to keep track of them. One of these that the books like is so long top part, here comes the thumb. So you start at the thumb side, proximal, go across and then back. If you go across both times, there's the much giggled at, some lovers try positions that they can't handle. So, S is for the scaphoid bone. That means resembling a boat. L is for the lunate, resembling a moon. T is triquetrum. It's sort of triangular. And then P is pisiform, which means pea-shaped. So S, L, T, P. Scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. You can feel the pisiform bone here. This is actually a sesamoid bone. It's in the tendon of this muscle. Second row, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. So, trapezium and trapezoid, very similar names. This is kind of a trapezoid shape, depending which way you hold it. I like to use the mnemonic that starts here because it goes alphabetical. Trapezium, I-U-M, comes before trapezoid, O-I-D. Capitate, that means it has a head. This end is rounded, fits against the scaphoid. And then hamate means has a hook. You can see that hook here. If we put this into position, the trapezium sticks up over here, hamate and pisiform over here. There are ligaments that go across and form a gap. That's the carpal tunnel. Carpal tunnel syndrome is when it gets inflamed in there, and all the many tendons that go through your wrist rub against each other. So that's your carpals: scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. So the one T that's off on its own is very different in name from the 2 T's that are next to each other. Trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. The rest of the hand is made up of long bones. The first row is called the metacarpals. You've seen meta as middle, but it also means beyond. So you go to the carpals, and beyond that is the metacarpals. The metacarpals are the reason skeletons look like they have such long fingers. In our living hands, they're covered with flesh, but there's still 1 per finger. So that's your metacarpals, and they're just numbered 1 through 5, starting at the thumb side. And sometimes you'll see them in regular Arabic numerals that we use every day, sometimes in Roman numerals. After the metacarpals are the phalanges. Those are the finger bones. Singular is phalanx, which means soldier. They called them soldiers because of the way they line up like they're about to go on a march. The phalanges are also numbered, and then to distinguish which one you mean on which finger, the one that articulates with the metacarpal is the proximal phalanx. The furthest one out at the fingertips is the distal phalanx. Now, the thumb only has those 2. If you look at your thumb, there's just 2 bones in it, where your other fingers have 3. So we got really technical naming the third one. So we have proximal, middle, and distal phalanges. Okay. And that's your hand bones: carpals, metacarpals, phalanges.